So, good afternoon everyone, and thank you to the Stock Exchange of Thailand for the opportunity to speak to you today. In particular, thanks to Narirat and her colleagues for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be back in Bangkok. I lived here in the mid-2000s and consulted for UN agencies and NGOs on trade, investment, human rights and labour migration issues. As Narirat mentioned, I'm the lead for Walk Free's engagements with the financial sector institutions in the Asia-Pacific region, including investors and stock exchanges. I coordinate the Investors Against Slavery and Trafficking initiative, which comprises 40 asset owners and asset managers from around the region, representing 8.6 trillion in Australian dollars in assets under management. The investor members currently engage with 22 companies listed on 9 regional stock exchanges to support them to find, fix and prevent modern slavery. Walk Free is an international human rights group working to accelerate the end of all forms of modern slavery. We published the Global Slavery Index, or GSI, which is the world's most comprehensive data set on modern slavery. In May, we launched the 5th edition of the GSI, measuring the extent to which modern slavery exists and how well governments are responding to solve this severe human rights problem. The GSI includes findings and a country study on Thailand, which I will talk about shortly. Today I've been asked to speak on the topic of turning risks into opportunities in relation to human rights and modern slavery risk management. It's a timely subject to consider. Until now, the focus of regulatory responses to business and human rights has been on identifying and managing risk and, to a much lesser extent, providing remedy. But what if managing human rights risk and even preventing human rights impacts could create new opportunities for business to pursue? In doing so, I'll focus on the Australian approach and experience. Since 2018, Australia has had a Modern Slavery Act. The Act takes a disclosure-based approach to involving business in the fight against modern slavery. It requires reporting entities with more than $100 million Australian dollars in revenue to submit an annual modern slavery statement. This statement must describe modern slavery risk in operations and supply chains, the actions taken to respond to that risk, and how the effectiveness of these actions is assessed. The idea underlying it is that reporting entities will improve their management of modern slavery risk by identifying, addressing and reporting it, and interested stakeholders such as investors, civil society and the media can hold them to account by reviewing their statements and encouraging them to do more to fight modern slavery. But first, let's set the scene a little more by defining what we mean by modern slavery, understanding the major findings in the latest GSI, including in relation to Thailand, and the key risk factors and indicators of modern slavery. Modern slavery covers a set of specific legal concepts. They include some familiar and not so familiar terms, such as forced labour, the worst forms of child labour, human trafficking and slavery-like practices such as debt bondage. Although modern slavery has not been defined in law, it is often used as an umbrella term that focuses on the commonalities across these legal concepts. That is, situations of exploitation that a person cannot refuse or leave because of threats, violence, coercion, deception or abuse of power. Modern slavery happens at the most extreme end of the spectrum of labour standards that ranges from decent work to criminal offences. Not all dangerous working conditions or exploitative labour practices amount to modern slavery, but they can greatly increase the risk of it occurring. You might have seen the ILO's indicators of forced labour, which list 11 different types of labour exploitation, such as restricting workers' movement, keeping their passports, withholding their wages, and requiring excessive overtime. An estimated 50 million people lived in situations of modern slavery on any given day in 2021. Of these, about 27 million were in forced labour. The most vulnerable groups were children, women and migrant workers. More than 12 million children were enslaved, while women and girls account for over half of all the people in modern slavery. Migrant workers are 3 times more likely than non-migrant workers to be in forced labour. Since 2016, the number of people forced to work against their will or forced into marriage has risen by 10 million. This worsening situation has occurred against a backdrop of armed conflict, more frequent and intensifying climate events, and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. There have been significant disruptions to employment and education, and increases in extreme poverty and unsafe migration, which together heighten the risk of all forms of modern slavery, particularly for those who are already vulnerable. Additionally, modern slavery occurs in every country, regardless of national wealth. Indeed, more than half of all forced labour can be found in upper middle income and high income countries. The Global Slavery Index is a national breakdown of the extent of modern slavery in 160 countries. The 10 countries with the highest prevalence of modern slavery, that is the number of people in modern slavery per 1,000 people, are on the left of this map. 4 of the world's 5 regions, Africa, Arab states, Asia and the Pacific, and Europe and Central Asia are represented on this list, which underscores the global reach of modern slavery. These countries share political, social and economic characteristics. Many are in volatile regions and have experienced conflict and political instability. Several of them have authoritarian governments or governments that perpetrate forms of state-imposed forced labour. And some are countries that host millions of migrant workers that are extremely vulnerable to exploitation. The largest number of people in modern slavery is found in the 10 countries on the right of the map. These countries account for nearly 2 in every 3 people living in modern slavery and over half the world's population. Notably, 6 of these countries are G20 countries and 6 of them are located in the Asia-Pacific region. The GSI also assesses what governments are doing to respond to prevent or remediate modern slavery. You can see here the countries that have taken the most action to address modern slavery on the left and the countries that have taken the least action on the right. The governments that have taken the most action are generally characterised by having more resources at their disposal, relatively strong political will, and a vibrant civil society to hold them to account. In our region, Asia and the Pacific, we have seen some positive recent developments in both national and regional coordination and business and government laws. The Thai Ministry of Justice published a draft second Business and Human Rights National Action Plan in 2022. The Japanese government introduced its new guidelines on respecting human rights and responsible supply chains last year. The New Zealand Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment recently consulted on a new legislative proposal to require all organisations to take action if they find modern slavery. The Government and Business Forum of the Bali Process on People Smuggling, Trafficking in Persons and Related Transnational Crime, composed of government and business leaders from its 45 member states, was revitalised by a meeting in Australia earlier this year. And lastly, the Australian government has allocated $8 million recently in its federal budget to establish a new anti-slavery commissioner. It also recently published its statutory review of the Modern Slavery Act, which proposes introducing a new due diligence system requirement and establishing a regime of offences and penalties. An estimated 29.3 million people are living in modern slavery in our region, Asia and the Pacific. This accounts for 59% of the global total. When population size is considered, our region had the third highest prevalence of modern slavery in the world, with 6.8 people for every 1,000 people forced to work or marry. Among the 5 regions, the Asia Pacific also had the third highest prevalence of forced labour, with an estimated 15 million people forced to work. The highest prevalence countries in the region are North Korea, Afghanistan and Myanmar, while the lowest prevalence is in Japan, Australia and New Zealand. India, China and North Korea had the highest number of people living in modern slavery. Together, these 3 countries account for 2/3 of the region's population. The forms of modern slavery found in our region include migrant workers in situations of debt bondage, hereditary forms of bonded labour in South Asia, and state-imposed forced labour in China, North Korea and elsewhere. Government responses to modern slavery vary significantly across the region. The GSI estimates that on any given day in 2021, there were 401,000 people living in modern slavery in Thailand. This equates to a prevalence of 5.7 people for every 1,000 people in the country. Thailand had the 4th highest prevalence of the 27 countries in the region and ranks 79 out of 160 countries globally. Forced labour in Thailand occurs in sectors such as agriculture, fishing, construction, manufacturing, domestic work and hospitality. Many of these industries rely on migrant workers who are particularly vulnerable to modern slavery. They are often charged recruitment fees for visas, work permits, health checks and other expenses. These costs can also be inflated to increase the burden of debt, trapping migrants in debt bondage. At the same time, however, Thailand is among countries taking the most action to respond to modern slavery in the region, with the 3rd strongest response out of 32 countries. Since 2018, the Thai government introduced a national referral mechanism to ensure victims of exploitation are referred to support services. It has ratified ILO conventions, including the Protocol of 2014 to the Forced Labour Convention and the ILO Work in Fishing Convention, and it has introduced measures targeting exploitation in the fishing industry and amended its anti-trafficking law to effectively criminalise forced labour. Companies in Thailand are also contributing to fighting modern slavery. One example I would like to share is Thai Union, but I'm sure there are many others, of course. Thai Union's workforce is composed mainly of workers from Cambodia, Myanmar and Thailand. In 2021, it updated its ethical migrant recruitment policy to align with the Dakar principles of migration and dignity and the employer pays principle. The policy aims to ensure safe migration and reduce the vulnerability of migrant workers to labour exploitation. As part of its recruitment process, Thai Union pays all fees and costs incurred by workers seeking to secure employment. From January 2022 onwards, it began implementing the principle for recruitment of migrant workers in its Thailand-based operations. Building on this example, some key actions that all Thai business and investors could take almost immediately to respond to human rights impacts and specifically modern slavery risks include the following. Adopt a human rights policy, conduct human rights due diligence and have an effective grievance mechanism in place. Update their human resources and procurement policies, procedures, codes and contracts to manage general and specific risks, such as the recruitment process for migrant workers. Establish a cross-functional human rights or modern slavery working group and conduct board, senior management and all staff training to identify and manage risk across operations and supply chains. And lastly, report publicly on risk management actions and results. So let's now turn to how we assess and report modern slavery risks and other adverse human rights impacts in operations and supply chains. What are some leading frameworks and tools for doing so? The UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights establish the global standard of taking a risk-based approach to managing adverse human rights impacts, including modern slavery. They recommend business put in place a human rights policy, conduct ongoing due diligence, and establish a grievance mechanism for remediating adverse human rights impacts. The UNGPs apply to all internationally recognised human rights, which cover a wide range of political, civil, economic, social and cultural rights, as well as vulnerable groups such as children, women, migrant workers and their families, Indigenous peoples, as well as persons living with disabilities. A new generation of human rights laws is starting to implement the UNGPs to varying degrees at the national level. I mentioned the Australian Modern Slavery Act earlier. Other recent legislative responses from around the world include France's Corporate Duty of Vigilance Law, which requires large companies to carry out human rights and environmental due diligence and publish a vigilance plan annually. And the US Uyghur Forced Labour Prevention Act, which requires companies that source material from the Xinjiang region of China to prove their supply chains are not tainted with forced labour if they want to import goods into the US. Investors are also frequently integrating ESG issues into their investment processes. The thousands of Principles for Responsible Investment, or PRI signatories, have committed to incorporating ESG issues into investment analysis and decision-making, and to being active owners and incorporating ESG issues into ownership policies and practices. Human rights and modern slavery are widely recognised as two of the most important issues making up the S in ESG. In the sustainable finance field, stock exchanges are increasingly mandating listed companies to submit sustainability reports. The UN's Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative reports that 35 stock exchanges require ESG reporting in their listing rules. These stock exchanges include Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand and Vietnam in the ASEAN sub-region. The reporting frameworks used include the Global Reporting Initiative, which has disclosure standards on forced labour and child labour. To support listed companies to report on their financially material sustainability issues, stock exchanges are also publishing reporting guidance. The Stock Exchange of Thailand partnered with Walk Free and the Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking Initiative to develop the guidance on modern slavery risk for Thai business. Set issuers are required to report on sustainability issues each year in accordance with the One Report disclosure requirement. The One Report mandates issuers disclose information about their performance and results on social issues, including human rights protection throughout business value chains. The guidance will help issuers to develop and disclose their performance, managing serious labour risks and providing decent working conditions. It is complementary to SET's corporate sustainability guide for listed companies. The guidance consists of 3 sections that introduce listed companies to modern slavery and identify what modern slavery risk looks like and how it might be addressed and disclosed. Section A addresses the issues that you can see bullet pointed on the screen, including the definition of modern slavery, how prevalent modern slavery is globally, and how it impacts business value chains. Section B, identify specific industry risks that are relevant to the SET's 8 industry groups, which you can see up on the screen. And then the final section, Section C, provides a practical checklist for issuers to use in assessing and disclosing modern slavery risk in sustainability reports. Alongside the guidance, Walk Free released an online modern slavery benchmarking tool. This tool is designed to help all companies establish good practices in assessing and addressing modern slavery risk. In addition to the normative or moral case for preventing, mitigating and remediating human rights impacts such as modern slavery, there is also a very good business case and materiality case for doing so. We can see that modern slavery risks can potentially become traditional human rights risks that you might be more used to controlling. Slavery, forced labour and human trafficking are often criminal offences in criminal codes, while exploitative labour practices will typically breach employment or industrial laws. This poses significant legal and compliance risk for business. A growing number of countries are also introducing import bans that prevent market access for goods made with forced labour. This is an example of heightened regulatory and administrative risk. I mentioned the US Uyghur Forced Labour Prevention Act earlier. Worker abuses and other human rights scandals can tarnish brand and harm reputation, resulting in loss of market confidence. A British online clothing retailer's share price was halved in the space of 9 days several years ago, following accusations of labour exploitation in its supply chain. Such brand and reputational damage suffered can take years to rebuild. A company that relies on forced labour will not have a truly resilient workforce. This can be a major operational and project risk. Conversely, decent working conditions reduce the chances of strikes and protests occurring and even factories being closed. Lastly, failing to find, fix and prevent modern slavery can affect a company's ability to borrow money or attract investment. This represents potential credit and financial risk. In closing, let's now look at the prospects of turning modern slavery risks into opportunities. As we all know, business seeks to minimise risk and maximise opportunities. Some opportunities can be created or emerge when risks are controlled. Other opportunities are purely commercial and unrelated to risks. In Australia, we are beginning to see the signs of companies turning modern slavery risks into opportunities. I would like to share a few examples. The first is SEEK, which is an Australian human resource consulting company. It operates in Australia and in Asia. SEEK has a fair hiring program to address the criminal and labour risks that candidates can face when engaging online employment marketplaces. The company explains in its most recent modern slavery statement that job ads might involve deceptive recruitment, they might be for illegal jobs, they can unlawfully charge or fail to disclose placement fees, and they can explicitly discriminate against particular types of candidates. SEEK has implemented fair hiring controls and processes across its Asia hiring platforms. Its platforms provide automated tools and guidance for hirers to help them produce quality job ads. The next example is Outland Denim, which is an Australian denim and jeans brand. It was founded in 2011 to combat human trafficking in Cambodia by creating a safe workplace and dignified employment for trafficking survivors. It has 4 pillars of career development and decent work: training, opportunity, living wages and education. Outland Denim trains its workers in all stages of the jeans making process, and according to the company, many of its workers then possess higher skills needed to be promoted from the factory floor to support or management roles. Outland Denim also pays its workers a living wage so they have enough income to afford a decent standard of living and cover necessary expenses such as food, housing, healthcare and education. And then the final example comes from the Property Council of Australia, which is a national lobby group representing property developers and property owners. It has collaborated with a corporate social responsibility technology platform called Inform 365 to develop an online platform which allows its members to engage with suppliers to understand their modern slavery risk. Each supplier receives an online questionnaire to complete once, which reduces its compliance burden. The database that develops enables members to collect, compare and share data with each other regarding their common supplier risk management. I hope my presentation has been informative and helpful, and once again thanks to Narirat and Set for inviting me.